Good morning. Welcome to Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at MarketSite is Jay Gragnani. He's the head of Nasdaq Dorsey Wright. We're going to take a look at the Nasdaq-100, an index that is developed for large cap growth. Jay, thank you very much for joining me at MarketSite.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this. When did the Nasdaq-100 launch, and what's it designed to do?
Sure. So the Nasdaq-100 is an index that was created and developed back in January of 1985, and that index was designed to provide, number one, an index that you could track the largest securities that traded on the NASDAQ outside of the financial companies, and then also be a basis for investment products and vehicles that could be traded around the world.
All right, so is the Nasdaq 100 just a technology index?
It's a good question, because that's when people think of Nasdaq 100, the first thing that they think about is, oh, it's a technology index. No, at its core, it's not a technology index. Now, with that said, there is a large technology exposure that is in the Nasdaq 100, and when you look at it, there's about 60% exposure to technology, which means there's 40% of that index that's not technology. And so the biggest other notable areas of weighting from a sector perspective in there are things like consumer discretionary companies, as well as a number of healthcare company exposure. So there's a big weighting within technology, which over the years has been a very, very good thing for that index, and certainly speaks volumes to how that index and the performance is done as a result of the technology exposure. But at its core, no, it's not.
Well, the Triple Q ETF is the most associated with the Nasdaq 100. What other products are available around the index?
Well, there's a lot of products available. So there's an ETF now on the Nasdaq 100, or versions of the Nasdaq 100, that trade on about 28 or available in about 28 countries around the world. So not just the U.S., but all over the world that investors can access the Nasdaq 100. If we think here just in the U.S. for a minute, there's many ways to slice the Nasdaq 100. The Qs, as you mentioned, is the Nasdaq 100 in its purest form, but there's other investment vehicles, ETFs out there, as well as mutual funds that give the exposure to the Nasdaq 100 in some different flavors. There's an equal-weighted version. So you can buy the Nasdaq 100 instead of buying it in its fashion that tends to be more cap-weighted. The equal-weighted version just looks at all 100 stocks and equal-weights those stocks in that. You can carve out, if you wanted the Nasdaq 100 exposure without the technology exposure, there's an ETF out there for that. QQXT is the ETF that does that. And then if you just want the technology exposure, there's a Nasdaq 100 technology-specific QTEC is that ETF that gives you the exposure to just the technology stocks in there. So lots of different ways to look at that index and gain exposure to the Nasdaq 100, not only domestically, but around the globe as well.
All right, well, thank you very much. And traders, thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.